and working with you all to create the Greenwood and Bridgeville transportation plan. So tonight, I'm going to continue with the presentation for the next 20 to 30 minutes, going through the whole trajectory of the process, starting with the beginning, skimming medium high level with some of the work that was done early on, talking a bit more about findings and the recommended strategies, which are reflected here on these boards, and then give some time at the end to talk about the displays, talk about any questions you have, and send you on your way. So this project started out as part of the coastal corridor study, which has been underway for the last, let's see, handful of years, 2 to 3 years, and I'm actually not seeing my notes on this page, so I better be extra sure that I have the right times. But and that study covered, because I didn't move, I was looking at the preview slide. That study covered the area shown in purple, and I guess, yeah, there's the mouse. And then more recent, that study focused on exploring east-west traffic in that area, shown in purple. We all know this part of the state has been growing pretty rapidly. So then last fall, that coastal corridor study refocused and branched into 2 separate planning approaches. One was focused more on the eastern end with more immediate needs that were identified for the transportation system needs to be managed. And then over here in the Greenwood Bridgeville area, the best strategy forward was more of a longer term planning process. So that's what we've been undertaking for the last 6 to 7 months. The objective here with this planning process mainly is to ensure that as the community and the surrounding area grows, those actions that need to be taken are aligned with the community vision. And so I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the Greenwood and Bridgeville, I knew it would happen tonight, transportation planning effort aims to proactively work with the community to shape that community vision and prepare for a future that can address the transportation needs, whether that's 5, 10 years or beyond. Also, an opportunity to update transportation plans for this area to reflect current needs and local priorities. And then lastly, foster collaboration and really focus on the necessary integration of transportation and land use. And we're happy that we have had a great stakeholder committee with us, including town representation, Bethany here tonight from Bridgeville, as well as town representation from Greenwood. So, let's see. So like I said, we got started back in November. We did pull from existing comprehensive plans that the towns had, as well as a master plan that was done within the last 10 years or so for these areas. And that's where we initiated the visioning work. Over the course of the winter, we've reviewed existing conditions to understand what's going on the ground, spoke with the community. Some of you are at the public workshops. A few people here are on the stakeholder committee. And then we pivoted now this spring to focusing on developing the draft plan and strategies. And our stakeholder committee met monthly. So thank you again to those of you who were involved with that. And as we look forward to this summer, we'll have plan coming out and the ongoing process of iterative planning, and you'll learn more about that here as well. So I mentioned some of the engagement activities that went on over the course of the process. They're highlighted here, and I won't go into detail, but in addition to the public workshop in February, we had a couple of presentations to town council, town commission. We have the webpage, and then there's also now a public input page, which is similar. It's a web page, and that's where tonight, if you connect to the link on the little flyer that Gemma has in the back, you can sign up and also take the survey, which we'd encourage you to do to reflect on what we have here tonight. So you can sign up for updates there, and then you'll be able to get any periodic updates that come related to this effort going forward. So community visioning and existing conditions, that's a pretty fundamental part of the planning process. And it's all about identifying through the vision where you want to be, identifying through the existing conditions evaluation where you are, And then the plan is, how do we get to where we want to be? So here you see a few folks that attended the public workshop sharing their vision for the area as it relates especially to transportation. And when we boiled it down based on feedback from the public and the stakeholder committee and those original plans, this is what we came up with as the vision for the community, the principles of this plan. Preserving community character, really keeping the community, preserving that charm that the community has that people like so much. Containing and managing growth. So of course, it's great to have economic development, but let's make sure that it's of the type and it's coming in the places that will work best for the community. Enhancing agriculture, local agriculture, making sure that doesn't get degraded over the course of change. Improving infrastructure sustainably, connecting and uniting the community, and that's both sort of in the social sense, but as well as the physical sense of transportation system. And lastly, to Jen's point, promoting safety throughout. So now looking at the question of like, what's going on today? How are things today? We asked a number of questions and I outline here kind of what we think about. This is a little bit of an education session of what you think about as we're looking at the transportation planning process. So where do people live and work? And once we know that, we can understand a bit more of, okay, and where are they going to need to travel between? What are key features of the transportation system today? Where is growth happening and anticipated, so that as we look to the future, we're being proactive. What are the anticipated impacts of growth and change on transportation? And then a couple other questions too, related to those vision principles, economic development and conditions, as well as environmental. So I'm going to talk for the next few slides just about surface level, some of the key points that came out of that work from the winter. If you are interested in more details, they are on the web. And also we're here tonight, happy to answer more questions. But so first of all, where do people live and work? Well, it's probably no surprise that this part of the state has been growing pretty quickly compared to the rest. And that's what you see here in the charts at left. And blue is Greenwood, orange is Bridgeville population change over the last handful of decades and projected out to 2050. And so you can see continuing to grow, but at a slower rate over time. So that's what's anticipated. And then in terms of where people are most concentrated, where they live, that's the areas on this map in green. You would see similar patterns with the employment or jobs locations as well, although not necessarily people that live in those areas are the same people that work in those exact same areas. So. Then we look at different features of the transportation system. For example, on the left of the screen, sidewalk conditions marked out. So we ask, questions like, okay, is this serving us well, or what may need some improvement over time? Same with bicycle network. Areas in green are connected and low stress. Areas in yellow and red are roads that would be considered more challenging for bicyclists. We looked back in 2021, there was a roadway sufficiency assessment conducted, and that was across the whole study area, that original, western end to eastern end study area. It looked at most roads, maybe except the smaller real local roads, but it looked at most of the roads in the area and provided a physical inventory of roadway conditions and identified potential issues to be addressed to bring those facilities up to desired standards. So this is just an example here on the right of part of Scott Store Road at SR 404. So that information is used, and then also getting an understanding of where crashes are happening. So these maps show you the brighter orange and reddish colors are where the most crashes were happening during the 3-year time period that were looked at for coastal corridor, the entire coastal corridor study area. The big takeaway here, specific to Greenwood and Bridgeville, is that the hot spots in our Greenwood Bridgeville area were US 13 and Redden Road. That was one that was called out. There's certainly, you can see a few others like US 13 and 16, Newton Road and 13, and further south as well to 18. Okay. So then asking the question, where is growth happening and where is it anticipated? We ask that to try to, the best we can, no crystal ball, but understand where transportation demand will be in the future and how the transportation system is likely to be impacted so that it can be planned for. And here you see land use data information, and I'll explain in just a second, but that's really important because with development with people, transportation systems are impacted and vice versa. So this map shows the black outlined areas are the municipal boundaries today. The purple and green are longer term planned growth areas as per the comprehensive plans that are currently on record, which were done within the last 5 or so years for each of the towns. And so that's kind of saying, okay, these are the areas we'd expect to grow into. The colorful part of this is the state's policy. It's called State Strategies for Policies and Spending. And that's been in place for a few decades, but it's an approach that basically says areas that are the brighter colors are where we want to invest more, invest a proportional level of investment that suits growing in those areas that are more, in some cases, urban. Maybe that's not the best term here, but more oriented toward development. And then in areas that are in the yellows, whites, for sure, those are really intended to be rural. So on par with that, keeping the context in mind, the idea is, okay, and we don't want to be, widening roads as much and doing more intensive infrastructure that might not be suitable for those areas. So planning, basically the takeaway is planning accordingly and joint coordinated planning, transportation and land use. Gray is the out of play areas. That means those areas are preserved. So all that to say, we can see where the main areas of population and development is likely, and we want to align plans with it. Now, this also is same information here of those state strategies colors, showing again red and orange and yellow where you'd expect, and the state and others involved here, agencies wanting growth to occur. This isn't showing all the actual development that occurred. It's just a map of the growth that did occur in the level 4 areas or more rural designations, but there's a decent amount, and that's a trend, is that there still is a substantial amount happening out in those areas that are intended to be more rural, and that has implications for transportation and other things. So that's something that needs to be grappled with, is being grappled with, but it's a challenge. So the planning and coordination between land use side, which is in the purviews of the county and towns, and the transportation department. With that in mind, it's important to ensure that the infrastructure is delivered in a way that serves the existing communities, connects with the new communities, and is doing so in a sustainable way. And here you see, you don't need to understand all the details, but these are sort of the next step in the process. Once the population forecast projections and employment forecast projections are had, and those come from official projections that the Delaware Population Consortium generates, then the Department of Transportation takes that information and uses its travel demand model to say, okay, so based on all this data, this is where we'd expect changes or impacts to the transportation system. And they use that to help make plans for longer term, more complex needs. And continually, they're iteratively doing that over the years. So what are anticipated impacts? Okay, so then the output, in a sense, is these maps showing the average annual daily traffic volumes. So the volumes for an average day currently on the left as of 2019, and then projected out to 2050, so roughly 30 years. Just to orient you a bit more, so the darker browns are areas with higher volumes, of course, and the reason on the right, the map, you don't see as many greens is not because those roads are not there, they just were not modeled because they were not, it was very unlikely that those roads would see significant growth. So they really focused in on the roads where it was probably borderline, yeah, this might shift over to a new category. And so in red, I've circled those areas in our study area that would be based on projections impacted, that being the SR 404 segment heading into Bridgeville, the SR 16 segment up near Greenwood, and then Redden Road there in the middle. In terms of economic development, the stakeholder committee discussed a number of things and we looked at a number of things. So I'll try to summarize, and again, we can talk more details as people would like, but issues like freight related traffic certainly came up. Large truck navigation through towns and around towns and what impact that has. Traffic associated with delivery vehicles, which is becoming ever so, common, and the associated navigation there. And among all the regional and seasonal traffic and local and regional traffic, certainly there's the importance of sustaining safe operation for farm vehicles in this area as well. Also related to economic development is this question of, do we want traffic coming into the towns or do we want it just going around the town, or what is the right balance there? So some of the data here on the right-hand map just speaks to where is this traffic kind of splitting off and how's it navigating around. This data is called Streetlights. It's a source of data that comes from phone devices, and without getting into all the technicalities, it's showing traffic coming from Maryland SR 404 into Delaware. So of vehicles that they saw coming in, saw through the devices and technology, the amount of traffic then you see at that branch close to Bridgeville that's using the Newton Road bypass is about 75% going around the town versus a 25% at that point that continues on through. So that's an interesting point to think, well, 75% is going around, 25 in. What if that were shifted one way or the other? What impacts might that have on the community? So that's the type of question that as we go forward, needs to be kept in mind, monitored, and you'll hear a bit more about that in a moment as well. And then certainly environmental conditions are also related to the transportation system. A couple of more obvious ones are impervious surfaces and flooding that is associated with roadways, runoff, which can affect water quality in the area. And this map right here shows just wetlands, floodplain, water bodies, and tax ditches and marshes. But to the point of water is important here. Air quality certainly and emissions can also be something that's related. And while the committee did bring this up, this wasn't as much of a focus with the immediate strategies that you'll see on the boards, but it is something that, in a coordinated, cooperative way, different agencies can collaborate on moving forward. So again, something to note in the plan that we'll note in the plan, but that is not as much reflected in the projects, transportation specific projects. So this summarizes it up. This is basically the framework with which we are moving forward, and the plan will contain, and then we'll talk now, shifts to more location specific information and those recommended strategies. So just an overview, this is where challenges and opportunities popped up from the work that was done and the conversations that were had with stakeholders and the public. In blue are those that were predominantly just public and stakeholder comments. In orange, that reflects more of information that came out of that roadway sufficiency assessment and some of the coastal corridor study work. So that was more transportation assessment findings. You can see they're spread around. And so I'm going to go through the strategies table now. I won't go into every little bit of detail because at the end you'll have a chance to look at it and ask questions. And again, I'll point out, you take the survey and if you'd like, we have some stickers. If you want to put your stickers on the points that you agree with or that you think are a priority, we've also had that ready for you tonight. So first, starting on US 13 corridor up at the north end in Greenwood, the situation or concern here that was raised. Intersections were found to be crash prone or a hot spot based on crash analysis for the coastal corridor study. The traffic division of DelDOT has identified this area for signal upgrade infrastructure, and there's opportunities for pedestrian safety enhancements and some overall infrastructure improvements to get things up to standards. So that was brought up as the concern. And as far as the strategies going forward, DelDOT's going to proceed working with the local community and town to implement a full signal rebuild and also evaluate addressing other intersection configuration improvements that might be needed and potential corridor pedestrian signalization upgrades, as well as bicycle upgrades. Then moving further south, just outside Governor's Avenue and Rock Road in Greenwood, we've got the Early Childhood Education Center and concerns about especially ingress and egress of the traffic when school's starting and ending, coming out onto US 13. A crash analysis was done in 2022 and didn't identify this as a significant crash hotspot. And so going forward, the recommendation is for DelDOT, the town, and the school district to continue coordinating, exploring connections and treatments that could be added here, and also potential circulation changes perhaps on the site. And then longer term could be addressing it through coordination that would happen through development and sort of longer term. All right, again, further south, US 13 at Redden Road, the intersection was identified as a crash hotspot, as you saw on the map before. As Redden approaches the US 13 intersection, the traffic lights currently have what's called a permissive left, and that's when oncoming eastbound and westbound can proceed through an intersection and turn left, as long as, of course, it's safe. So one direction doesn't have a red, the other direction, both directions have a green, let me put it that way. And Traffic Studies Group did evaluate this recently, and they're going to adjust the signal operations so that there is no, I guess it's no permissive left here. It would be red light on one direction, green through, and then it would switch. So the other direction could proceed with a green arrow. All right, US 13 at Newton Road, with the amount of industry in this area, there certainly was raised the issue of large vehicle traffic, as well as some turning and merging conflicts at the corner there, the southwest corner, with additional potential for more industry and other development. Also, folks were raising concerns over the course of the process. In terms of status, certainly there's ongoing review and consideration to updates, and then longer term, beyond crash study and such, Jen, this is Newton Road, this is where you were saying the corridor is slated for a fiscal year 24 project.
Yeah, right. So literally just today, DelDOT planning is going to be looking at the Newton Road corridor, and that's the full corridor on the east of 13, as well as out to 404. It could involve anything as examining realignment, whether it needs shoulders, whether there needs to be any type of bike or ped facility added to that segment, how many trucks are coming through and what direction they're heading. So we're going to do a deeper dive into the Newton Road segment coming up in 24. So stay tuned for that. I'm happy to move that forward as quickly as possible.
And that ties in with this as well. This is just, I'm sorry, I was thinking Newton corridor. This is US 13 full corridor. So let's step back for a second. So broadly here, you're actually seeing two maps. One on the left is the northern end at Adams. On the right is an aerial showing the southern end over at the intersection with SR 18. But broadly speaking, folks were raising concerns about just the amount of truck traffic, ingress and egress of large vehicles, and speed of overall traffic. So in terms of path forward, the recommendation would be to consider a median crossover study along this segment. And in particular, this one is, let's see, I guess we're not seeing, yeah, just the southern end there. On the right-hand side, you can see one of the locations that was brought up at the stakeholder committee outside of Heritage Shores, but looking at how median crossovers, longer term, removing them potentially, upgrading or removal, and also more generally focusing on the goals of the corridor capacity preservation program, which seeks to kind of separate traffic for safety reasons as well as capacity and such. Okay, Newton Road, back to Newton Road, and this is at Adams. This intersection was identified in the roadway sufficiency assessment, as well as other folks in the stakeholder and public input. There's misalignment, so Adams comes out at Newton and then it shifts down the road and continues on. As we mentioned, truck and large vehicle traffic is going through this area. And so as far as a path forward recommendation, reviewing the crash data at the intersection and then conducting a curve study for that curve on the western side there of the intersection and potentially exploring feasibility of realignment or other solutions. And then what I jumped ahead of myself for was the full corridor of Newton Road. Jen mentioned the corridor study, so that would be addressing some of the other broader concerns, but certainly also with the longer range forecasting, it's just something to keep an eye on as one of those roadways that does attract a relatively, high amount of traffic for the area. So as that population growth occurs, tracking what's going on and figuring out when things need to change. Okay, then SR 404 at Scottsdale Road, you see this aerial with that intersection being an interesting one. Scottsdale Road coming into 404 at a different angle, not a 90-degree angle. Folks were raising safety and operational concerns. Some of the lane markings are confusing, and we even watched when Jen and I were out on site, people not quite knowing exactly how to navigate necessarily, and also hearing from folks that even live adjacent there and the amount of goings on as folks pass through. So as far as a recommended path forward, consider a study to evaluate and identify how to improve the intersection configuration for safety and operations, and then also reviewing crash data and developing concepts to adjust the horizontal geometries and better address movement. Okay, SR 36. This has a couple of spots. One, this on the far left of the screen at 16 and 36 intersection. Folks raised the concern about cars not stopping, and then also closer into town, folks raising the concern about pedestrians crossing at a busy location where they've got a couple of different actively used commercial sites. So the DelDOT and the town are in communication, and in terms of recommended path forward, again, reviewing crash data to evaluate the need for further study and action, and for that pedestrian crossing issue, a couple possibilities near term, perhaps putting out the in-street crossing sign. That's more of a temporary sign, but can help, and then longer term proceeding with integrated land use and transportation coordination for essentially like a corridor study, gateway, traffic calming and such. Okay, SR 18. Here you can see the intersection of US 13 and 18 on the left, and then the visual photo of it. Also then on the right, we've grouped all of these, by the way, the SR 18 kind of into a corridor grouping here. On the right is 18 further east at Oak Road. There, the concern was a relatively higher number of pedestrians without facilities, shoulder even to get to a general store, small store, convenience store from mobile homes at the north. back to the intersection of 18 and 13. Definitely a number of folks raised safety and operations concerns regarding speed differentials or the difference of speed of vehicles as they're mixing and merging into and out of the forthcoming 7-Eleven and other developments nearby. Cannon Road, Wilson Farm Road, that's further west. People raise safety concerns at intersections and speeding. And then Coverdale Road intersections and approaches also folks raise concerns about safety and some curves and such. So generally speaking, recommended would be to implement a corridor monitoring effort. So that would be looking at all of these issues. And some of the types of things that would happen, for example, would be looking more closely at crash data. We're nearing the end here. So just a handful of others. These are spread around the study area. I think what I'll do is look at the ones that are more focused in Bridgeville. So we talked about Redden Road, and I don't think I mentioned here that actually concerns on Redden. Redden has a couple of projects that have been programmed and will be getting underway. So proceeding with implementation there. Mile Stretch Road, folks raised, and I think the Roadway Sufficiency raised, identifying the roadway in poor condition. And so a mill and overlay of the roadway was the recommended path forward. Wesley Church Road at Railroad Avenue. That's that little connector across. The concern was raised about safety and speed through that section. And we connected with the town to explore the options, and that is a town managed road. So that's kind of up to the town as far as how to proceed addressing that concern. And then Fawn Road, Newton Road, just on the other side of US 13, some safety and sight distance issues, and that would be addressed, recommended to be addressed by reviewing the crash data and evaluating need for additional interventions. I think tree trimming would be a natural. No pun or no joke intended. And then this grouping of other issues that were raised really came out of the roadway sufficiency assessment. So you see on the map here different curves and utility poles close to the road and such. So we grouped those together, and the recommendation for these would be to proceed with addressing these through DelDOT's ongoing Sussex County curve study. And that would likely involve reviewing crash data, evaluating the need for center lines, rumble strips, other enhancements, chevrons, and potentially advanced warning signs and such. So just winding down then. So as we pivot now, we've drafted these ideas. These bullet points show you the inputs and the involvement, and the arrow represents the iterative process. This will continue to need to go through. Some of those projects that are more long-term, complex, have longer timeframes naturally, but continued coordination is kind of the theme for the evening. What you see down below in this table is simply the additional information that gets incorporated as a project moves toward, and in order for a project to move toward its next steps. So things like coordinating with lead agencies and other agencies that need to be involved, identifying the time frame, the funding costs, and so forth. So those all happen. And in general, you know, the more complex the project, the longer it takes. So some of these things here can fit into existing processes and programs and could be nearer term, and some of them are certainly longer term. You know, we talked about Newton Road. While there are perhaps things that will come out of the corridor study that will be identified and can be moved forward more quickly, something more intensive would obviously take more years of planning and engineering. So I think I'll leave it at that. And just remind folks, please do take the survey. that will be available and out there through June 9th. This is the link you go to get to it. And through that, you can sign up to have a notice sent via email as new information comes through. So that'll be occasionally updated over time as things occur and are notable. And then the report will be posted to the site as well. And then just moving forward, as you heard, a number of these recommendations will proceed, and there will be ongoing planning, coordination, monitoring, and we'll just look forward to continuing to hopefully have folks touching base. And as projects come through, also keep your eyes open, because it's great to have it's really important to have members of the community involved over the course of the entire phases of projects. So with that, thank you very much.